What's up, music fans of the internet? I'm Kevin.
I'm Derek.
And together we are last week's album, the only reviews with two different views. And in this episode, we're talking about the new album by Elliott Smith, the Heaven Adores You soundtrack, and asking the big question, over a decade since his death, how is Elliott Smith still surprising us? Cheers, Derek, and everyone at home.
Cheers, Kevin, everyone at home.
Elliott Smith was an American singer-songwriter who came up in Portland in the 90s. While the grunge scene was really big, his more quiet acoustic style really arose in stark contrast. You might know him from the Oscar-nominated song Miss Misery from the Good Will Hunting soundtrack. And he fought depression, alcohol, and drugs, and eventually passed away in 2003. And this album is a soundtrack to a biopic called Heaven Adores You. And it's mainly previously unreleased recordings, a lot of early demos, jam sessions, live tapings, things like that. So let's get into it. Let's talk about what it sounds like. Derek, what do you think?
Kevin, I think Heaven Adores You sounds like a winding walk along the musical path with the enchanting ghosts of Elliott Smith, and B, a great movie.
I think this sounds like you're listening in on a sound check before Elliott Smith plays an acoustic set. All right, let's talk about some highlights from the album. Derek, what made your list?
Kevin, before I get to my list, I want to talk about your list, and I'm guessing one of your highlights was the harmonica in Son of Sam. That one was one of the acoustic numbers, and throwing in the harmonica, I really liked it, and I'm guessing you liked it too.
Yeah, you pegged me. I'm always a sucker for the harmonica. However, my biggest highlight on this album were the instrumentals, surprisingly. I thought they show a really sort of fun, jammy, occasionally whimsical side. Untitled Melancholy song, Hamburgers, Unknown, Untitled Soft Song in F. Those are actually my favorite tracks, surprisingly, which I didn't expect at all.
I think on first blush, some of the instrumentals, they started off as some lowlights for me, but the more I listened to them, they really drew me in. I totally agree with you on the whimsical take. I thought it was interesting because at times I could make some connections to other songs I was familiar with. You could kind of feel some of the development. Untitled Melancholy song demo, one that's out for me for that very fact. No vocals, and if I'm not mistaken, no drums either. So a lot of layered guitars, which, obviously kind of helped to build the foundation for his sound later on. Another highlight to me were the live tracks, Say Yes and Miss Misery. The former at the intimate Yo-Yo A-Go-Go in Olympia, Washington, to the latter on the nationally televised Late Night with Conan O'Brien. Just in a few short tracks on the album, I thought really illustrated Elliott's rapid rise to fame with the success of Miss Misery. You can tell the difference in the intensity level between those two performances, much intimate versus, nationally televised. So I just thought that was really cool.
But yeah, and I think even the instrumentals and the more stripped down ones as well reminded me how crazy good Elliott Smith is at guitar. Because I think a lot of times you get wrapped up in his voice because it's very distinct as well. But there's so much going on the guitar underneath, and those instrumentals really pointed that out to me once again. Let's talk about some lowlights then. Derek, what do you have?
I Love My Room, maybe only because it was a little too stripped down, a little curveball, kind of in the somewhat chronological order this is done in. Although I imagine in the movie itself, I imagine this is very poignant and just incredible. But from an album perspective, I get that one was sort of a miss for me.
All of the more finished, produced tracks on here felt out of place to me amongst all these instrumentals and demos and live versions. I'm sure they have a place in the overall film, but that's why it's kind of funny to listen to a soundtrack just on its own. But on its own merit, I thought those really stuck out like sore thumbs. And we've heard them before. I'd rather kind of hear a different take on it. I definitely think it's more of a soundtrack than an album, more like a curated collection than a really tight, cohesive album. But, again, all that makes sense in the context of a soundtrack. That brings us to overall rating and answering the big question over a decade since his death. How is Elliott Smith still surprising us? Derek, what do you say?
After all this time, it's just refreshing to walk down this kind of career development, the outtakes, some of the live stuff. Is really interesting to experience that. I really like kind of the rough chronological order. Overall, I really enjoyed this. It was a refreshing look in at some of Elliott Smith's work. So that being said, I'm giving this one a 4 out of 5.
To answer the big question, how is Elliott Smith still surprising us? The instrumentals really highlight a more fun, lighthearted version. You know, we're all used to this sort of downtrodden idea of Elliott Smith, but I think it's cool to think of him as someone who probably did have a lot of fun while he was alive. The stripped down versions also remind you how intricate his songwriting is. Overall rating, I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 5. I think the parts that blew me away really blew me away. A lot of those instrumentals and rare takes on tracks I hadn't heard before. Stuff I was familiar with didn't do much new for me. So yeah, there you have it. A combined 7 out of 10 from Derek and myself. So definitely check out Heaven Adores You soundtrack by Elliott Smith and let us know what you think. Don't forget to subscribe to us here at Last Week's Album, either on the YouTube channel or the podcast. Thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.